Hello, YouTube, and welcome to the first episode of my Civics course, the first full episode, that is. And today we're going to start off by talking about some of the documents that have influenced our government and why those are so important, right? Before we talk about something, it's always good to know why we needed to get there. And so we're going to start off with one of the first documents that really defined why our government was going to be the way it was and how it was going to be set up, which is the Declaration of Independence. It was written in 1776 by Thomas Jefferson, and this document, although it doesn't actually set up a government structure, it does lay out the things that Americans at the time wanted in government. Why did we need the Declaration of Independence? Well, if you've studied American history, you would know that there were a lot of things going on in the world that were making the colonists upset with their current rulers, which was England. One of which was that the King of England was fighting several different wars with several different countries, and to help pay for those wars, instead of taxing people in England, he was taxing colonists. So he was taxing the people of the Americas, which they weren't very happy with. And then also, the king was starting to take more of an interest in kind of collecting revenue from the colonies. Up until that point, before, he hadn't really messed with the colonists. They were there. They still served England, but for the most part, he had left them alone. And so now he was becoming a little bit more heavy-handed in which he had the right to do. Technically, they were part of his kingdom. But the colonists didn't like that. They had been independent and running themselves for a long time, and now all of a sudden, they were being asked to do things that they'd never been asked to do before, mostly because the king had kind of just left them by themselves. So at this point, the king has troops in the American colonies. So there are British soldiers in American colonies. He's collecting taxes that he had never really taxed or collected before, and he was starting to meddle with the affairs of the colonists, trade and commerce and all of that, and they were all very upset about that. There was also a massacre in Boston in 1775. British soldiers fired into a crowd of civilians and killed several people, so tensions were high. The Declaration of Independence states, one, what the Americans think the government should be doing for them, and then two, all of the reasons that they have for no longer wanting to be part of the British government. So let's get started with the Declaration itself. In that very first paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, they come out and say right away, look, when people who are being ruled by a power don't like what that power is doing, if they are doing more than they are supposed to do, the people are allowed to dissolve their ties to that government. That's a pretty profound thing to say, especially at that time, right? In the 1700s, the people didn't have that kind of power. Now, in England, they had more power than most, but the people didn't have the authority to dissolve governments. That doesn't happen in the 1700s. And really, it doesn't happen too often nowadays. Okay, in theory, the people could dissolve a government in different countries, but it doesn't exactly happen often. So they're saying here, look, we don't like what you're doing. We don't think you're governing us fairly. So we're going to dissolve your government and we're going to make our own government. So that's what they're saying in that first paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. We're going to make our own government. And then after that, in the second paragraph, they follow it up with what they think are some things that a government in America should be based upon. And they list three rights that they think that all men, which we know at that point only meant white men, deserved. And that's life. So their life shouldn't be infringed upon. They shouldn't be killed by their government. Liberty, which means they should have the right to do what they need to do or do what they want to do within reason. And then, of course, the pursuit of happiness. Now, the pursuit of happiness being, I should be able to do what makes me happy, makes me wealthy, makes me whatever it is a person desires in this country, right? They shouldn't be infringed upon by the government to be able to do those things. Now, the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness line, that's taken from John Locke, who is actually an English philosopher. And they kind of twisted it a little bit. They changed it. The original line was life, liberty, and property. They changed property to pursuit of happiness. I think it's a little bit more all-encompassing, and it really captures the Enlightenment feeling of the founders. So they changed that. Like I said earlier, right, when they say all men are created with these rights, they didn't mean all men. They were very specifically talking about white men. They did not include women. They did not include the thousands of Africans, hundreds of thousands of African slaves that were currently in the colonies. That didn't include indentured servants, which were people who gave up their freedoms so they can get a trip to the Americas. That didn't include the Native Americans. All those people were not included in that statement. Now, it says all men, but that's not what they meant. Okay? And they, once again, go on to say, after saying that these are these rights that we think we deserve, that if the government infringes on those rights, it should be abolished. So they're saying, basically, look, we think that there are these three natural rights that us wealthy white guys deserve. We don't think that you're following through on your end of the bargain to give us those rights, so we're going to dissolve your governance. Now, the rest of the document is pretty much just a really long list of the founders who signed this document just kind of complaining to the government about what they did was wrong. So it's just a list of things that they disagree with that the British government has done in recent times. Here's just a few of them that they listed that are kind of important moving forward in kind of how our government ends up getting set up. The first one is dissolving of representative bodies. So prior to all this mess happening, all the different colonies had their own colonial government, and they were mostly representative in nature. So they were kind of like the British Parliament. People were elected, and that group would decide, for the most part, what was going on in the colonies. Well, the king kind of had been stepping in and dissolving these colonial governments when he saw fit, if they were disagreeing with what he wanted. Now, the king, technically within the English government, had the right to do that, but he had never done it before, and so this was kind of a huge step against colonial government when he did do this. The next thing is stopping of immigration. Before the Revolutionary War began, the king started stopping people from other countries going to the colonies, right? These colonies were English colonies, and so there were people from like the Netherlands and France and all sorts of other different European countries that were seeking to come to the American colonies, and the King of England was like, nope, these are English colonies, we don't want you there. Well, meanwhile, the colonists were like, yeah, sure, we would be okay with that coming, like we don't mind, but the King of England was stopping that from happening. Inhibiting the judiciary from doing its job. The court system in the Americas before the Revolutionary War was run by colonists, and they had created their own court systems, and they were following the laws that the colonists had created for themselves, and King George had kind of, once again, overstepped in the colonists' view and appointed royal courts to oversee those courts, and sometimes even shutting the colonial courts down, which the colonists did not like. They accused him of holding armies with no threats around. That actually is a little iffy, if at best. Right before the Revolutionary War, there was a very large kind of global war called it's called the French and Indian War in American history, but in the grand scheme of world history, it's called the 30 Years' War. And in that war, basically every major power in the world was fighting. And the French and Indian War part of it, that was when the American colonists fought on behalf of the British against the French Canadian government, and the Native Americans who aligned with the French, because the French treated the Native Americans much better than the English colonists did. And so after that war ended, England decided to keep their troops in the colonies afterwards. They're like, well, look, we don't want to have to worry about this. We don't have to send these troops all the way back and forth in case something else happens. We're just leaving them here. the colonists didn't really like that. So they said, look, there's no more threat. We don't need these troops here. England disagreed. That was one thing that they had an issue with. Another thing the English government did was they cut off trade with other parts of the world. So, for instance, there were lots of different colonies in the Caribbean and a lot of different European countries who were trading with the English colonies. And because England had become enemies with so many other countries, they were effectively cutting off the trade the colonies had been relying on to make the money they needed to continue doing their stuff. So, for instance, lots of the colonies in the Caribbean were Dutch-owned or Spanish-owned, and they weren't allowed to trade with them. They weren't allowed to trade with, for instance, France or the Netherlands or any other European country because England wanted their colonies to trade with England. They wanted to be making all of the money off of their colonial trade. And that's basically just one of the top tenets of mercantilism, right? If you have a government and you're making a colony that's supposed to be supporting and serving you, you want that colony to only be trading with you, because if they're trading with other people, those other countries are making money off of your colony. So the king was like, yeah, we don't like that you're doing that. We're going to stop you from doing that. Colonists obviously didn't like that. And then finally, the other two big ones, they were suspending local laws, which I kind of had touched on earlier. And then also, they began taxing, like I said earlier, the colonists for all sorts of different things. For instance, there was one tax called the stamp tax, which is basically like any time that they wanted to send a letter or any kind of mail or any kind of official government document, they'd have to pay money to get a government seal on it. They had never had to do that before. They weren't very happy about that. Same thing with the tea tax. That was another unpopular tax at the time. They put a high tax on the import of tea into the colonies, and the colonists drank a lot of tea, so they weren't very happy that all of a sudden that their favorite drink was being taxed so heavily. There were other taxes along with that. There was one on like paper and a few other ones. But in general, these taxes were meant to pay for the war that the British had fought to defend America, right? Defend the colonists in the French and Indian War. But the colonists didn't see it that way. They had fought the war themselves. They had gotten some help from the British, but they were saying, look, you don't need to tax us to pay for this war because we fought it ourselves, right? This is unfair. The other major thing that they had an issue with is because the colonists were colonists, they didn't have representation in the English Parliament. In the English government, the Parliament had the right to approve new taxes, and that was solved a long time before this. Well, the colonists didn't have a seat in that parliament, so they didn't get a say in what was going on with them and their taxes. So this overseas island in England, right, their parliament over there were like, well, we need more money. Let's not tax us because we're over here. Let's just tax the colonists. But the colonists weren't able to say, well, now hold on a second. Why aren't you being taxed? Why isn't everybody in the empire being held responsible for this war? Why is it just us? So they were really upset that they weren't being asked or involved in the process of these new taxes being created, like all Englishmen were supposed to be able to, but they were not being involved. So that was very upsetting to them. So all of these different things, all these different issues that they were having with England kind of give us a glimpse of what the colonists were upset about going into the Revolutionary War, why they thought they needed a new government, and then two, these are kind of the original values that these colonists turned Americans are going to be looking towards when they start writing their own government in the future. So going forward in the course, keep in mind all of these things that are kind of like the original issues and ideas that are going to end up forming the decisions they make in the future. So in the next video, we're going to talk about what their first attempt at making a government is and kind of how that went, and then we'll move on from there. Thank you so much for watching the first episode of my civics course. More are obviously to come. We're going to be covering a lot more material. I'm looking forward to you watching and viewing and learning. Thanks again. See you later.